Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 ClinGen Clinical Genomics Career Series. I hope you are all doing well. We're just going to give a few minutes for everyone to log on. Thank you all for attending, and a huge thank you to our panelists and to our moderator for the session today. While we wait, I'm going to put up the schedule for the other sessions that are coming up. So as a brief introduction, my name is Caitlin. I'm a genetic counselor at Geisinger. I am part of the ClinGen team. ClinGen is NIH's clinical genome resource. And we are putting together and holding a career series for anyone who is interested in learning more about various careers in the clinical genomics field. This week is the first session, and we're starting off with a panel of genetic counselors. And then there are 4 additional sessions coming up. They occur on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And as a reminder, all of the sessions are recorded, and then we are posting the recordings to our website, which I will drop in the chat so everyone can have the link if you want to go to the recording, if you want to register for additional sessions coming up. So right now, let me switch over and I will start recording the session for us. Okay, fantastic. So I think we have the enrollment has loaded. So again, welcome and thank you all for attending. So this is the ClinGen's Clinical Genomics Career Series for 2023. And this is the first session. We are starting off with a panel of genetic counselors. There are 4 additional sessions. The schedule is on the screen. All sessions are happening on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. I did put in the chat the link to the page on our website if you want to register or learn more about it. And all the recordings for the webinars will be posted on the website at the end of the week. So if you can't attend live, no worries. Everyone's schedules are super busy. Check back in at the end of that week and you should see the recording. All right, thank you to those who provided questions for our panelists as part of registrations. We have incorporated the questions today and we will open the floor up for additional questions throughout the webinar. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box, the question and answer box. It should be at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And then when people post questions, other people can vote to see if there's a question that people are really interested in. Okay, I'm going to start us off with a quick poll. It's just 2 questions. The first question is to kind of gauge where everyone is in their career path. And the second question is just to assess your familiarity with genetic counselors and the field of genetic counseling. Just giving everyone a minute to answer. I hope you guys are all doing well on this Wednesday. Okay, great. I'm going to end the poll, share the results. So it looks like the majority of participants today are undergraduate students. We have a few already attending a master's program from genetic counseling and a number of people who are not currently a student or maybe graduated. So kind of people all over, and thank you for attending. And I hope that this helps bring some more information your way and a range of people in terms of their familiarity with the field. So great. Thank you all for participating. Going to stop sharing that. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Alex. He is going to moderate our session. Alex is coming to us as a genetic counselor from Lurie's Children's in Chicago. So thank you so much, Alex, and I will be monitoring the Q&A to see if there's any questions that come up.
Great, thanks so much. So as was mentioned, my name is Alex Ng. I'm a genetic counselor at Anna and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago. So this is a panel on genetic counseling, so always helpful to give a little bit of background. So the first question, what is genetic counseling? So the definition of genetic counseling from the National Society of Genetic Counselors is that genetic counseling is a communication process that aims to help people understand and adapt to the medical, psychological, and familial implications of genetic contributions to disease. So the next question then is, well, who are genetic counselors? So genetic counselors are specialists who provide personalized information about your genetic health. Genetic counselors have expertise in genetics and analysis, interpersonal, psychosocial, and counseling skills, education, and professional development and practice. Next slide. So if that sounds interesting, how do you become a genetic counselor? Well, typically, the first step is going to be a bachelor's degree, and these are most often coming from individuals in biology, social sciences, or related field, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. But once you finish your undergraduate degree, the next step after that would be a master's degree and a graduate program. You would have a graduate program in genetic counseling from an accredited program at a university, which would include coursework. So you would learn about things like medical genetics and genomics, psychosocial techniques. You would have clinical training, so rotations through different sites to see patients, as well as some research aspect of it. Sometimes it would be called like a capstone, sometimes it could be called a thesis, but there's a research component to a genetic counseling graduate program. As of right now, there are 56 accredited programs in the United States and Canada. So then after that, once you finish your graduate program, the next step is going to be your board exam. In order to get your ABGC or CAG certification in the US and Canada respectively, you have to pass your board exam. And then after that, before you can start working, there are some states that require a license to practice. And as of right now, there are 32 states that are issuing licenses. Next slide. So traditionally speaking, there were three major areas that genetic counselors worked, and those are going to be cancer, prenatal, and pediatric. But as you can see from this diagram, the scope of what genetic counselors do has expanded pretty rapidly. And so you have genetic counselors that can work in cardiology. There are some that work in neurogenetics, adult, metabolic diseases, general genetics, as well as testing laboratories. So it's expanded way beyond what it used to be. And so where do genetic counselors work? They can work in a variety of settings. The most obvious one is going to be a hospital setting seeing patients. They can also work at a university. They can work in a commercial laboratory. They can work in a nonprofit laboratory. And they can also work for things like the government as well. Slide. So this is just a quick breakdown about how genetic counselors do their job. So what you're seeing here is data from the PSS. The PSS is the Professional Status Survey that is put out to give sort of a snapshot of what the field looks like in terms of genetic counseling. And as you can see on the left column over here, a lot of genetic counselors provide direct patient care. So you see patients, they come in to see you in the clinic. You would educate them about, their genetic condition, genetic testing, so on and so forth. Things that you would think about when as a provider. And what you'll see is that back in 2014, about 3/4 of genetic counselors, this was what their job entailed. The other half of this is non-direct genetic counseling. So this can be things like teaching at a graduate program for genetic counseling. This could be working in a laboratory doing variant interpretation or writing genetic testing reports, working as a customer liaison or as a medical science liaison. And as in 2014, about 20% of genetic counselors did this. But what you'll see as time has gone on, as recently as 2022, that sort of shifted a little bit to be a little bit more equal. So about half genetic counselors now work in direct patient care, and about a quarter work in non-direct patient care. The third column you'll see over here is actually one that I sort of identify with, and this is a mixed position. So these are individuals who are genetic counselors that see both patients, but do other things on the side as well. So at Lurie, I work in our genetic testing lab doing variant interpretation and report drafting, but I also see patients in clinic as well. And you'll also see this type of position has grown much more popular and much more common as time has gone on. So about a fifth of genetic counselors have this mixed position over here. Next slide. So to put this in a different lens, some of the numbers that are interesting is that genetic counseling has grown by over 100% in the last 10 years and is expected to grow another 100% over the next 10 years. The average salary for a full-time genetic counselor in 2021 was just over $100,000 and can range up to $250,000 depending on the specialty area and the expertise. For the 2021 new graduates, 71% had accepted a position before graduation, and 55% of the remaining graduates had accepted a position within 2 months after graduation. And then finally, 83% of genetic counselors report they're satisfied with their job, and 88% of genetic counselors report being satisfied with the profession. Next slide. So that was a very, very brief overview of genetic counseling and genetic counselors. But if this is interesting to you, we have our panel. But here are some additional resources for you to look up at your convenience: the National Society of Genetic Counselors, the Accreditation Council for Genetic Counseling, the American Board of Genetic Counseling, and the Association of Genetic Counseling Program Directors. So some helpful links to look at later. All right, so with that, we'll switch tracks and we'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. So today we have Christy DiLoretto from Geisinger, Kara Anstedt from NYU Langone Health, Alicia Gomes from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, Adam Buchanan from Geisinger, and Tina Kim from Montefiore Medical Center. So thank you all for taking time to participate and really looking forward to hearing all your insights. So I think the first question is to get to know our panelists a little bit more. So I think we can just go around and give us a little bit more detail about what you do and where you work right now. Does anyone want to go first?
I could go. Hi, everyone. My name is Tina. I am a relatively new genetic counselor. I started working as a GC at Montefiore Medical Center as a cancer and prenatal genetic counselor almost exactly a year ago in June of 2022. That's me.
I can go next. My name is Alicia Gomes. I am a genetic counselor. I've been at UAB since 2010. My initial role was as a laboratory genetic counselor for the molecular lab. And then, excuse me, more recently, about what's been a little over a year now, I now work as an assistant professor for the genetic counseling program.
I'll go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Christy. I am also a newer genetic counselor like Tina. I started about a year ago at Geisinger, and I work in two different main areas. One is the cardiogenetics clinic here, and then I also have time in research as well, mainly on a project called MyCode that we can talk about in a bit, but it's more population health screening.
I'm happy to go next. I'm Kara. I've been a practicing genetic counselor since 2015. I work in neurology. Initially, I had a split position between two specialty clinics here in neurofibromatosis and neurogenetics, lysosomal storage disorders. But for the past 2 years, I've dedicated my entire practice to neurofibromatosis. I have a bit of a mixed position, so I do some clinic coordination and some research, but I also see a lot of patients in direct care.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Buchanan, also at Geisinger, and I've been in the field for almost 20 years now. I started out at Duke in a comprehensive cancer center in a mostly clinical role, and now I lead our Department of Genomic Health, which is a research enterprise focused on our genomics-enabled care at Geisinger and outcomes associated with that. So it's a strictly research position, no real patient care as part of the role.
Great, thanks so much. So I think from there, we'll sort of jump into, what does a typical day look like for each of you? Let's see, Tina, you started first. Do you want to go first on this one?
Sure, I could go. So I see patients about 3 days a week. And on the days that I do see patients, I'll start the day off by checking the results portal to see if any testing results came back for the patients that I have seen. I will usually prep for my patients, the evening before seeing patients. And in a typical day, I see about 3 to 5 patients. We don't really have like a set day for cancer or prenatal. And then the majority of the day, I'm seeing my patients. And then after that, I will spend some time writing letters, calling out results, doing follow-ups on my patients, things like that.
So for me, as a laboratory genetic counselor, my day was really up in the air from day to day. It just depended on what type of phone calls we had, what type of results we've gotten for the day. I would say a good percentage of my time was spent in a more customer service role. Other genetic counselors and geneticists and providers would reach out to me about particular cases that they wanted to discuss, decide what type of test approach needed to be done. When the samples came in each day, I would do a review of them to see if there were any issues, any unique testing approach we needed to consider, make sure that the test that was being requested made sense for the phenotype for the patient that was provided. And then we would also spend a good bit of the day looking at the results that came in from samples that had already been received. So where it took you was just based on what we found. So a lot of days were troubleshooting days of trying to figure out why something went wrong or if there's a problem that needed to be fixed. And then the other part of the day was more brainstorming. As a assistant professor for the program, spent a lot of time teaching and grading right now.
So given my role is sort of split with clinic and research, again, the weeks can vary or days can vary. I do see patients about 2 days per week. So one day is that cardio clinic, similar kind of roles that Tina explained and that I'm prepping the day before, seeing about 3 patients to 4 patients those days, doing test requisitions, calling out results over the phones those days as well from past patients. And I am involved since our cardio clinic is pretty small, but mighty. We have about 1.5-ish clinical GCs that run it, and other GCs that are a part of it, but kind of do more of the operations side of things. So I also have a hand in kind of improving the clinic and thinking about our processes and just thinking how we can make it better, how we can expand our services to more patients and educate more providers. And then on the research side of things, with the MyCode project that I spoke about earlier, that is a population health screening. So we consent patients at Geisinger to this project. They'll give a blood sample at some point, and then if we ever find any positive results for them that are on our gene list of about 60 genes, we do return those. So part of my time as a GC on that project is disclosing those positive results. So calling out to patients, trying to catch them on the line, disclosing that result and offering them a GC follow-up appointment. And then the other part of my clinical time with that project is seeing those patients. So once we schedule them, I have a clinic for that that's open every Thursday. I have 6 slots. They're not always filled, but we kind of counsel through those genes, take typical personal family history, talk about recommendations for those. Right now, I do have some research time as well. It kind of ebbs and flows as any research would. So I have some time dedicated to research that varies throughout the weeks, but kind of on various projects within that research project, MyCode in general. So definitely variable, but a little bit of clinic and research for you.
So I'm in clinic about 3 days a week, similar to the other GCs on this panel. As a genetic counselor for a specialty clinic, I see all of the new patients that come to see us with the physicians, and then I also see patients independently on my own schedule for specific genetic testing or family planning needs. As part of clinic coordination for our clinic, I also call about half of our new patients. I split it with our other clinic coordinator to triage because we do have a long waiting list, about 6 months to see us. And I want to make sure that if there's any urgent medical issues, those patients are getting seen sooner. I also help some of our patients with coordinating appointments if they're coming from far away or we're trying to get a lot of stuff done on one day for them. So that's like interfacing with our other specialists at the hospital to try to see what can work for them. During clinic time, again, I'm also calling out test results, doing documentation, following up with labs. In some of my research time, I do supervise students that are doing research. So I'm having meetings with them and following up with their progress. I also have some of my own projects. So I do things like IRB applications and following up on that, designing studies. And then I'm involved in a couple collaborations with other institutions or other specialists in our disease area. So we have different meetings about ongoing projects in the larger neurofibromatosis community. I think that summarizes most of my day to day. Something that is sometimes unique about being in genetics is you get involved in other genetics projects. More recently, I've been involved in the rolling out of genetic test ordering through our EMR system at the hospital. So I've been in many meetings about how to implement that, including things like consent forms and how it looks in our EMR. So that's been very interesting lately.
And as someone who's not in clinic at all during the week, I spend my time in meetings. So it is part administrative role and part research role. So the administrative work is helping to maintain the vision for our group and provide some strategic priority setting. There's also supervision that's part of that, some focus on team growth and development. We've got a group of roughly 70 people within our group. So it's a decent amount of time spent kind of managing the overall activities of the group and making sure that we're continuing to move the various activities forward. From a research standpoint, there are ongoing studies that I'm involved in, some in a leadership role, some in a support role. There is grant proposal writing, manuscript writing, variety of related activities like that, some collaboration discussions with external partners. We have some funding through NIH and some through some industry partners. So it's a kind of from one meeting to the next, it depends on what the particular task at hand is.
Excellent. So I have a follow-up question for either Tina, Christy, or Kara, the clinical GCs. So when you say that you are talking to the patient, you're going to see the patient. So what are you really talking about when you're meeting with them then?
Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I'm happy to supplement your answer, Karen.
Sure.
If
So when I see patients in clinic with a physician as a new patient, I do their whole medical history, family history intake, and review of systems. So I get the whole background on their health. We have 90 minutes for a new patient in my clinic. So I spend about 45 minutes to an hour with them as part of that process, depending on how complex things are. And then for the joint appointments with the MD, I then report back to them what I got through the intake. The physician sees them for the clinical exam, assessment, talk about the plan. And then I usually follow up with the patients afterwards if they need genetic testing. So that's consenting them for genetic testing, talking about what it means, if it's relevant to them or not, and the logistics of doing that. I also double check with them that they understand what their follow-up plan is with the clinic. For my independent genetic counseling only appointments, those usually are a targeted question that the patients have. So they want to review family planning, or they want to come in for new genetic testing. So that's going through all of their questions around that and counseling them on the family planning or the genetics evaluation. And making a plan for either genetic testing or referrals for family planning resources, things like that.
So I guess for our clinic, the layout of a session does look a little bit different because I work in a more general setting in both cancer and prenatal. The main difference, I would say, is that the consenting for the genetic testing would happen during the one session. And for most of my patients, I'm not seeing them for follow-up. If there's nothing else to talk about, unless something comes up in their prenatal ultrasound, or if we get a positive germline variant for a cancer patient. So I would say that is kind of a difference. And I'm not doing a complete review of systems for neither my cancer patients nor my prenatal patients. The day before I see them, when I'm prepping them, I would go over their charts and look out for any pertinent information and ask them these questions just to confirm the history and kind of hear it from their point of view as the patient. And then I take a more targeted family history, ask for exposures, specifically for prenatal patients, and then consent them for testing. Yep.
And I have a very similar process as Tina. So I see patients GC only for the cardio clinic, do a targeted review of systems. Usually some majority of the patients will have a diagnosis already and kind of have that background. Some I'm seeing for a family history of cardiac issues, so that might be a little bit more targeted questions, but basically same thing. Pedigrees or family histories are taken, benefits and limitations of genetic testing, what it can tell you, what it can't, and then consenting them overall. And then I do phone calls for results. Patients are welcome to come back in to see us if they're interested, but most of them just elect for the phone call for results disclosure. And then I guess for my research patients who are coming to see me with a result that's already positive, those ones are built a little bit different. We talk about the management recommendations and family cascade testing, inheritance patterns. We also take a family history and personal history more targeted to that gene risk, and just figure out where we need to refer, where we need to loop them in with. So those are a little bit more targeted discussions.
Great. And then a follow-up question to Alicia as sort of the lab component of it. You mentioned you were helping to review and interpret those lab tests. Can you just give a 1-2 minute summary or 30-second summary of what that looks like then actually?
Sure. I would say one big difference from being in the clinic versus the lab is we do have more people as a part of the team in the team approach that we're working with. So we have quite a number of PhDs and a laboratory director and other individuals who all play a role in the results that come out. So we have some PhD staff scientists who do the actual testing. When the results are reported by the laboratory technicians that they think they found a variant, I collaborate with the laboratory directors in deciding the interpretation of that variant. So is this likely pathogenic of VUS? And then the report that gets written sometimes is written by the laboratory genetic counselor. We have other people on the team as well. So the secondary parts of that would be potentially writing those reports as well.
Great. So now that we know our panelists a little bit better, we'll take a step back here and sort of ask first, how did you find out about your career? What sort of drew you to genetic counseling? Adam, I left you out of that previous comment, so if you want to go first, I think this will be yours.
Sure. So when I was in undergrad genetics class, I heard genetic counseling mentioned once. That wasn't enough to hook me. It was just a passing mention. So I didn't really encounter it until I was doing later graduate work in public health and stumbled upon a genetic counselor that I happen to work with. And what she did was intriguing. So I was able to work with her on my thesis for that graduate work and was hooked after that.
I first heard about genetic counseling in not a genetics class, but an immunology seminar, which was very random, but I was immediately interested. However, I was an international student, so I wasn't really sure what the logistics of becoming an international student would be. So I did have to do some additional research, contact other genetic counselors who were international students, contact the programs directly. And at that point, I was also about to graduate from college, was a little bit undecided on what I wanted to do with my degree. So I did work as a research assistant in a basic biology lab, and that kind of made me realize that kind of helping to create new knowledge in genetics and biology is not the same as appreciating already known knowledge about genetics, which I was already very passionate about. And I just enjoy talking to new people. So those two things kind of came together, and that's how I got into the field.
I also found out about genetics. It was the end of our genetic counseling. It was the end of my senior year of undergrad. And I was already kind of on a course of thinking that I wanted to work in a genetics lab. So I decided to take a job as a lab technician working in a clinical genetics laboratory that did diagnostic testing, where they had genetic counselors seeing patients and lab GCs as well. And then I found myself talking to the samples quite a bit and very interested in what the other people that were there were doing. And they were like, you really just need to be a genetic counselor because this is not for you. And so it's like, okay. So that's how I made my way to genetic counseling.
Okay, I'll go, Christy. So I found out about genetic counseling in my 4th year of my genetics undergraduate degree after feeling that medical school wasn't a good fit for me, and in the midst of trying out undergraduate research in which I was very bad at breeding zebrafish and very good at killing all the embryos too quickly, and realizing that bench research was probably not a good fit either. A senior level genetics course at my university was very smart, and they brought in people that worked in different genetics related careers as part of that course to talk about what they did. And when the genetic counselor walked in and explained his role, it was like a light bulb went off, and it was exactly the mix of genetics and healthcare and connecting with patients over time that felt like a good fit for me. So I pivoted almost immediately, and my family thought I was crazy.
I also found out about genetic counseling during my undergraduate career. So I went in undecided, knowing I liked biology, knowing I liked psychology, always had an underlying interest in genetics, but didn't know this was a profession until I started looking into the majors that were available. I went to Penn State, a branch campus, and then I was looking at the majors available for the main campus. One was called biobehavioral health, and so I ended up pursuing that and looked into what you can do with that. I just knew I was interested in health and all of the aspects that go into it. Genetic counseling was one of them. So I transferred to the main campus, and Geisinger is around the main campus. So I started emailing and figuring out how I can get in touch with a genetic counselor to learn more. Did a couple informational interviews with them, applied for an internship through Geisinger, got that, and started shadowing and just fell in love from there.
Great. So we heard about how you found genetic counseling as a field. So then how did you decide what schools to apply to? How do you decide what schools to go to? Any feedback on that?
I did something that I don't think anybody would do anymore, which was apply to one school. And I applied to that one school because I was nearly engaged, and my now wife was not moving. So there we were. There was one school in the state, and that was it. But now I think it's pretty customary to apply to 6, 8, sometimes even more.
Adam, you and I are in the same boat. So I also, from a logistics standpoint, applied to one school. I had no intentions of thinking I would get in. I was like, it's just going to be customary for this year. We'll see what happens. Because I was tied to the state because of just family related things. So I was like, well, I'll apply to this one school. We'll see what happens. And lo and behold, I got in.
Sometimes it works.
Sometimes it works.
I applied to a handful of schools. I'm from Canada originally, so I applied to the Canadian schools. And then I picked schools that were geographically closer to where I was from in Canada, but then also schools in New York because I have extended family here. In terms of which school I chose to go to, I chose to the only one that accepted me. So, and it worked out pretty well.
I also applied to a handful of schools, 6 to be exact. And I am originally from Korea, but I did my undergraduate studies at NYU in Abu Dhabi. So when I was getting to know more about the genetic counseling profession, I did do an informational interview with the one genetic counselor in all of Abu Dhabi, and he happened to be an alumnus of Sarah Lawrence. And he actually suggested that if I'm serious about pursuing genetic counseling, that I go to an NSGC conference with him, which was in Salt Lake City. So I met up with him in Utah, and he showed me around. He actually took me to an alumni reunion night at Sarah Lawrence. So then I got to meet all of the current students there and the alumni, and I just fell in love with Sarah Lawrence. So, you know, I still did apply to a few other schools because I did want to get in. At the time of my admission, we had switched to a match process. So you could only be accepted by one school. And I did end up matching at Sarah Lawrence, and I'm very thankful that I did.
So I also applied to 6 schools. It's a little bit different now with 40+ programs, and kind of comparing them all can be challenging. I was one of those Excel spreadsheet, let's do a comparison to figure out which ones will fit me best. But I sort of took a geographic approach too. So I'm from Pennsylvania, didn't want to go too far. So I kept it sort of local within the neighboring states in my applications. And again, with the match system, ended up matching with one of them, but certainly lots of considerations for them. Things that I looked for were options for rotations, and kind of the specialties that I thought I wanted to go into was always in the back of my head, finances in the back of my head, and then different hospital systems you can rotate at, trying to think of other things as well, but definitely a lot to consider, and it can be daunting picking those schools. But if you have one goal or a couple goals and keep those at the top of your list, I think that would help kind of narrowing it down.
I would also second this Excel spreadsheet route because that is also what I did, and I found it helpful.
Great. So how about after graduation then? How is that process? You know, you graduated, you're out into the real world. How is it finding a job? Did you find a job right away? Did you find the specialty that you wanted? Comments on that?
I can start. For me, having graduated 1,000 years ago, the general rule was either you got a job where you wanted to live and you were open to any specialty, or you were willing to travel anywhere to go to do the specialty that you want. At the time, I was very interested in pediatric genetic counseling, and I also really wanted to work in a lab. And so that's what navigated me to Alabama, to UAB. And they were also starting a genetic counseling program. So it was kind of the trifecta of all the things that I wanted to pursue. So it gave me the opportunity to dabble in quite a number of things. I can say for our current genetic counseling students, though, the vast majority of them have a job before they graduate. If they don't, it's by choice.
And when I was looking for jobs, it was the same. You could pick what you wanted to do or where you wanted to live, but not both. And so I ended up, again, really needing to stay where I was. And I'd been working part-time throughout school. So I turned that into a made-up position, and essentially convinced some of the folks that I've been working with that we could piece together a full position among all of them.
I feel like that it was the same 2 choices when I was graduating, and I feel like maybe that still exists now to some degree. I felt like I wanted to work in a specialty clinic setting. From the experience I had in school, I really liked to see the roles that genetic counselors have when they work with physicians that are not medical geneticists, where you can tie your 2 areas of expertise together and work in a more of like an autonomous team. But realistically, I discovered very quickly I wanted to stay in the New York City area. So I applied to many jobs within the area. And the job that I got was actually poorly advertised, and I had no idea what it was until I sat down with the physicians for the interview, because it was a very generic, this is what a genetic counselor does job description. And then I was pleasantly surprised to find out it was a specialty clinic in neurology. So it worked out for me.
I also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Christy. Okay.
I'll go quickly. So I did end up having a job before I graduated. So again, from PA, wanted to stay in PA for family reasons. So I kept my search pretty close. I did stay with Geisinger. So I was an assistant, a GCA with Geisinger before I went on to school. And I stayed working flex time for them during school hours. So I knew that we're always hopefully going to be an option and liked the hospital system. So kept that in the horizon, but also applied for other positions around my area of living that I wanted to be in. And then happily accepted that job offer to Geisinger within the school year still.
I also had a position before graduation, and Montefiore is actually one of the clinical rotation sites for Sarah Lawrence. So I'd heard a lot about the clinic, and I liked what I was hearing. And unlike Kara, after my rotations, I was still very undecided on which specialty I wanted to go into, because I guess I liked all of them. I was a little bit scared of pediatric genetics, but after my rotation, I was not scared of it anymore. But nonetheless, I thought it would be a good learning experience to practice within 2 specialties. And I still think that I'm learning a lot. And in hindsight, I think I did not realize how important it is to, or how helpful it is to join a clinic that has a large number of genetic counselors. I found that I was, learning a lot from them just by observing and through their example. It's always a good support network to have if you come across a case that you have never seen before, even in your rotations. And one of our genetic counselors has been working for over 30 years. So I'm always, relying on them for support. And yep, that's been my experience so far.
Sort of building off of that, you all have very diverse jobs and roles right now. So what would you say, how is your role as a genetic counselor different from other roles or careers in genetics then?
Maybe not in a clinical aspect, but our patient population is actually quite diverse. So I think my kind of multicultural background, having been born in Korea, educated in Abu Dhabi, and kind of also having grown up in the US as a child, helped me in this position. I would say about 30 to 40% of our patients are seen through an interpreter. We see a lot of, patients who have just relocated to the country and, might not be familiar with how the American healthcare system works. So we really try to go above and beyond and try to accommodate and explain these things to our new patients. And that's been a part of my job that I find really meaningful. And I know that, in certain other urban areas, the patient population might not be as diverse. So that's a part of my job that I enjoy.
For me, as being the only, the only genetic counselor as a part of my team, you really kind of distinguish out what the true role for a genetic counselor is. And for my team, it's patient advocate. So, we think about launching new tests, we think about changing testing strategies. And my lens is always, how will that affect the patients? What are the potential outcomes of that? And that's where I chime in, and they look for me to be kind of a content expert for. The other part is, as a genetic counselor for the lab, in the questions that I get are from other genetic counselors, I started to realize that I needed to become a specialist in the specific subset of disorders that we did, because the questions that they had were the same questions I had when I graduated. So I had to learn and then dig deeper to give a more thorough answer that a healthcare provider could appreciate.
I would echo Alicia's kind of comments about patient advocacy. As the first genetic counselor in my department and the only one for several years, I had to really stand up for genetic counseling as a profession and also what we stand for to the other clinicians and management in our department. And part of that was really being a voice for patient autonomy and defending patients' choice in their medical care and the decisions that are being made around them, which I felt was really important, and that genetic counseling training really sets you up for, is to be really a big proponent of a non-biased, patient-centered approach.
I would also highlight the points that have been made about the teamwork that occurs in genetics. We almost always function as part of a team regardless of role. And so it helps to really understand what our lane is, what our benefits, what our purview might be, and what we are trained to do and are not trained to do. All that's useful and helps you fit into the team well. But also, I think it's useful to understand how you might be able to apply some of the genetic counseling training to other things that might not necessarily be considered to be in scope. A lot of the patient care skills, a lot of the counseling skills come in handy in leadership, they come in handy in research, they come in handy in a variety of activities that genetic counselors haven't always historically been considered for, but I think are particularly well suited for. So it's always useful to think about how you might apply those genetic counseling skills to some new endeavors.
And along those lines, Adam, something that's, I think, unique to my position too is being part of the cardio clinic that's so small. We're doing a lot of how can we educate providers? How can we spread the word about genetic counseling to others, the healthcare system in general? So I think that's something that's definitely unique for my role too, but nothing much else to add that's different.
All right, so we're sort of wrapping up the last 10 minutes here. So I think the next question we'll talk about is, so what advice would we give someone who is thinking about pursuing this path? A lot of the individuals on this call right now are, in the undergrad phase and probably think about going to graduate school. So what is one piece of advice that you might want to give to those individuals?
Mine would be to reach out to as many different types of genetic counselors as you can. As you can see from this panel, we all hold the same title, but do completely different things. So to really make sure that genetic counseling is something that you want to go into, I think it's a fantastic idea to reach out to, shadow, interview as many genetic counselors as possible that are coming from as many different backgrounds as possible. It gives you a better lens of what your opportunities are for the career field and where you could potentially see yourself.
I would also kind of echo what Alicia is saying. Really advocate for yourself, vouch for yourself, ask for these opportunities. Don't be afraid to cold email genetic counselors. There is a page on the NSGC website, Find a Genetic Counselor. And the last time I looked at this website as a prospective counseling student, I think there's a column that says is willing to be contacted by students or not. So for those counselors who are willing to be contacted, they will sometimes list out their emails. So I went through that list, found a bunch of counselors who were willing to be contacted, and I think I sent out maybe like 20 to 30 cold emails and heard back from like 10 to 15 of them. And then that actually did lead into a shadowing opportunity that was not like advertised. So I think it's important to make those opportunities for yourself. Something else that I did was look for free webinars like this that were hosted by either organizations or different genetic testing companies. Most of the time, genetic counselors are on those webinars. So, not only could you get information from the webinar itself, you can also try to, connect with the other genetic counselors through these webinars as well.
I'd
I think
add that, oh, sorry, Kara.
No, go ahead, Adam. Go.
In talking to program directors, the pool of individuals who are interested in genetic counseling is larger than it used to be, and there are a lot of similarities among them. A lot of biology majors, psychology minors or majors, people who've done genetic counseling assistant experiences and shadowed and so on and so forth. Lots of similarities. So I think being able to articulate why you're passionate about becoming a genetic counselor, why you're passionate about taking care of patients in whatever way that might manifest is really important, because you have to present yourself on paper first before you get through the door of actually talking to people generally when you're applying to programs. And so being able to have a really compelling story for the source of that passion is, I think, really useful.
Yeah, I would echo that. On paper, so many applicants can look similar to each other. So if there's something in particular that you are passionate about, maybe it's an area of genetics that you find very interesting, I would encourage applicants to look into, can I get involved in things like patient organizations? Can I get involved in research to some degree? Going through your social network to see if you know people that work in different areas of genetics or the medical field, because sometimes that can get your foot in the door for shadowing opportunities. We have students shadowing with us because they have a personal connection to someone who works in our clinic. And that can be a little bit easier to get past that initial red tape, because clinics are so busy and sometimes they hear from many students that want to shadow with them. But I think if there's something in particular that you're passionate about, you can use that to help kind of cultivate an area of expertise and also something that sets you apart from other applicants.
I was thinking about that same thing, and I honestly don't think I have anything else to add. The first thing that was said is just gain experience talking and figuring out what genetic counselors do. There's so many great areas, so many diverse places you can work to. So would just echo everything that's already been said.
Excellent. Okay, so I lied. We'll have one more question then. So for the group, we mentioned before that the professional growth is jumping quite rapidly. So can you comment on how you feel your growth as a genetic counselor has been, as well as the field as well?
I can start, I guess.
I'm
Or
happy to
Adam,
kick
go
it
ahead. No,
off
you go
too,
ahead, Adam.
'cause,
Go ahead.
I think I've been in the field the longest. So what's really been striking in the time I've been in the field is the growth of opportunities in a variety of different areas. So both clinical specialties, laboratories, industry settings, just a much wider variety of settings for practice than there used to be. And greater opportunities for leadership in those settings too. So that wasn't at all the case when I started, and that's been a significant increase over time. So as the number of individuals in the field has grown, there's also been a growth in the types and amount of opportunities. And I think that is in part due to, those genetic counselors kind of leveraging their skills, and also a recognition of, from non-genetics folks that there's a good fit and good opportunities for genetic counselors where they're working.
I was going to pretty much say something very similar, because I think, over the past 13 something years, there's been more and more opportunities for me as a genetic counselor, I feel. And a lot of that has been through working with people who are non-genetics trained individuals who really start to see the value of what a genetic counselor can provide. And so it's just opened up a lot of opportunities with regards to leadership, or niche projects that you can work on as a genetic counselor and be the advocate or serve the role as the genetics informant. Because especially when you're working with non-genetics trained individuals, one of the key things that we learn as genetic counselors is taking these complex concepts and breaking it down into a way that a lay individual can understand. And when you're working with non-genetics people, that's what they need. And so it's opened up a lot of unique opportunities.
For myself, in terms of professional growth, sometimes we think about professional growth as like a change in title or a promotion within your institution. And I think the system that genetic counselors exist in institutionally is sometimes challenging to have that kind of promotion. But in terms of like other professional growth, because I've developed expertise in a particular disease area, and I've also learned that it's really good to say yes to things when you're early in your career and figuring out what is a good fit for you. I have gotten involved in doing a lot of like speaking engagements. So I speak at patient events. I've been invited to speak at conferences, and that's something that I really enjoy doing. And I've also made a point of like coming up and talking at the podium, like at the microphone at like genetics conferences, so that I can say, this is my name, this is my title, and this is what I do, so that people become familiar with the value that we bring to these conversations. So I've really focused my professional growth on what can I offer as a genetic counselor to my particular disease specialty area, which has been very fulfilling.
All right, and then Tina, Christy, I know you're just starting, you just graduated, but any thoughts on where you see the profession going, in the next few years then?
So I know that genetic counseling assistants are also an emerging profession, and I think that's a great way to get a foot into the door. And I think, with the implementations of GCAs, it helps genetic counselors also practice at the top of their scope. So, I hope that we also get a GCA soon, and I don't really have anything else to add.
I think thinking about the clinic that I'm in, some direction that I can see the field moving into is maybe less pre-test counseling and more post-test counseling as we start to engage with a lot more non-genetics providers and helping them figure out how to order, how to indicate if someone is a good person to offer testing to, and kind of moving more into like the PCP world, I think is another good avenue and something that's emerging currently and hopefully a lot more in the future.
Great, thanks so much. I will pass this back to Caitlin now. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for all your participation, for all your questions. A huge thank you to our panelists. Thank you for your time, for sharing your expertise, sharing everything that you have done with your career. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much to our moderator. It is 1 p.m. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, so I'm going to kind of put a quick spin on it. I put up the schedule as just a last minute reminder that this was the first of 5 sessions. There are 4 more to come. And this is the link if you want to listen to the recordings or you want to register for additional sessions or see if there's any other events that are coming up. And a reminder that after the series is completed, we will be sending out a survey for feedback. This is really appreciative if you could take the time to send it to us so we can improve these sessions and other sessions for the future. I want to once again send a huge thank you. I really appreciate everyone's time. I really appreciate your willingness to participate and to share with the field. And also from what you've all said is you guys kind of learned about the field because of sessions like this. So I really appreciate passing it on so that we can continue to grow our field and let people know that we're here and what we can do. So again, thank you. And I know that some people had some additional questions in the chat. We will I think we answered most of the questions, but if you have any other last questions, just don't hesitate to put them up. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.